There's a kind of heaviness that builds slowly. Not like thunder that crashes in without warning, but like a quiet storm that grows behind your ribs, day after day. That was what Can Yaman had carried inside him for months. He had always been good with words. In interviews. On set. Even in front of thousands. He knew what to say, how to say it. But with her, with Demet, it had become harder with time. Not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much. And that's exactly where the story of that night begins, not with silence, but with all the words that had been buried long before. Can and Demet hadn't spoken properly in weeks. There were text messages, sure. A few neutral conversations during rehearsals. Eye contact on set that lingered just a second too long. But nothing real. Nothing that told the truth. Because the truth was this, they were no longer just acting. They hadn't been for a while. It was subtle at first. A look that lasted too long. A line delivered with a little too much emotion. A hug that neither pulled away from quickly enough. The chemistry on screen had always been undeniable. But off-screen, it had started bleeding into real life. And real life wasn't scripted. That terrified Can. He had built his life around control. Around image. Around protecting himself from vulnerability. Falling in love, not just on screen but in reality, meant surrendering that control. And with Demet, he felt himself unraveling. He remembered the exact moment he realized he was falling. It was during a scene they were shooting late at night. The rain machine was on full blast, soaking them both. Demet was shivering, her voice cracking from the cold. Between takes, she looked up at him, smiled with her lips trembling, and whispered, "This job is madness, but I'd still choose it if it meant standing here with you." He didn't reply. He couldn't. Because something had shifted in him. Her words weren't in the script. They were hers. And they hit him harder than any line ever had. But he never told her that. Instead, he nodded, gave a tight smile, and walked back to the camera. He told himself it was safer that way. As days turned into weeks, the distance between them grew. Not physically, they were still filming together, still attending events, but emotionally. He began pulling away, not out of anger, but out of fear. Fear of what might happen if he let his heart speak freely. And then came the night. The night she invited him over. No agenda. No cameras. No scripts. Just them. He knew what she was trying to do. She wanted to talk. She wanted to understand. Maybe even fix whatever was breaking. He accepted the invitation, but he didn't prepare himself. He walked into her apartment that night carrying 1,000 unsaid words, and not a single one made it past his lips. The door clicked shut behind him. Demet was already in the living room, barefoot, hair tied loosely, wearing that oversized sweater he remembered from their first late shoot together. She smiled gently when she saw him. But he didn't smile back. Not fully. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey," he replied. And that was it. He sat on the edge of the couch, hands between his knees, staring at the floor. She brought him tea, like always, but he barely touched it. Instead, he sat in that silence, heavy and unyielding. Demet tried to fill it. She asked how filming had been. If his mother was well. If he had seen that new movie they talked about. He answered with nods. Single words. Short phrases. But not once did he look her in the eyes. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, heart pounding. "Can," she said gently, "what's going on?" He blinked. Swallowed. Looked away again. I don't know." 3 words. That's all he gave her. But it wasn't true. He did know. He just couldn't say it. He couldn't tell her that he was afraid. Afraid of how much he needed her. Afraid that if he let her in any deeper, he would lose himself. Afraid that their story, the one they were pretending on screen, was starting to feel more real than anything else in his life. She waited. She didn't press. Instead, she whispered, "I miss you. Even when you're sitting right here." And that nearly broke him. He clenched his fists. His jaw tightened. Everything inside him screamed, "Say something. Tell her." But he didn't. Because deep down, he believed silence was safer than honesty. That maybe if he kept quiet, he wouldn't break her. Or worse, he wouldn't break himself. Minutes passed like hours. Demet stood, walked to the window, her back to him. "I don't want to keep guessing what I did wrong," she said. "Or if I did anything wrong at all." He looked up at her then. For the first time that night. And what he saw made his throat tighten. She wasn't angry. She was tired. Tired of waiting for a man who had so much to say but refused to say any of it. He stood too. Slowly. Walked to the door. Turned back. She didn't follow. He placed his hand on the doorknob, hesitated. And then left. Without a word. He sat in his car outside her building for 27 minutes. Not driving. Not moving. Just sitting. He stared at the lights from her window. Wondered if she was crying. Or if she had already decided to let him go. Maybe both. And still, he said nothing. Not in a message. Not in a call. Not even in his own thoughts. Because the truth was, silence had become his shield. But silence doesn't protect. It isolates. And that night, Ken realized something he hadn't before: silence can be a kind of cruelty. Not the screaming kind. Not the violent kind. But the kind that says, "You're not worth the truth." That wasn't what he wanted to say to her. But that's what she heard. Days passed. Then weeks. They returned to set. Did their scenes. Smiled for cameras. But something between them had died that night. Not love, no, love doesn't die that easily. But hope. Demet never asked again. And Ken never offered. It wasn't until much later, years, even, that he found himself scrolling through old messages. Pictures. Videos from set. Her laugh. Her eyes. The way she used to touch his arm when she was trying to make a point. And it hit him. That night, he hadn't lost her because he was angry. He lost her because he was silent. Because he didn't fight. Because he thought silence would protect something fragile, but instead, it shattered it. He closed his eyes, whispering a truth far too late. I should have spoken. But all he had left now was silence. The kind that followed him home. The kind that echoed in the quiet corners of his apartment, in the songs they used to love, in the places they once visited hand in hand. It haunted him, not with screams, but with the absence of sound. And every time he replayed that night in his head, he didn't remember what he said. He remembered everything he didn't. The hug he didn't give. The apology he didn't make. The truth he didn't dare say. Because in the end, silence hadn't spared him the pain. It had become the pain. And no matter how many nights passed, that one night, the night he didn't speak, never really left him. It lived in him. Quietly. Relentlessly. Like a shadow he couldn't outrun.